Today's podcast includes commentary from a guest speaker. Neither the RIA Compliance Collective nor RIA Compliance Concepts is affiliated with the speaker or the company he or she represents.
Whether your advisory firm has 1 or 5 people, compliance will always be an issue. RIA Compliance Concepts is more than just another service provider. We truly care about seeing our clients prosper. That's why we started our podcast, the RIA Compliance Collective, providing up-to-date compliance guidance. We're passionate about doing our job so you can focus on doing your job. We understand regulatory compliance like the back of our hands, from full-service RIA registration to annual compliance reviews and everything in between. We're here to get you there.
Hey everyone, this is the RIA Compliance Collective and I'm Megan Campbell. Co-hosting with me today is my friend and colleague, Colin O'Brien. How have you been, Colin?
Excellent. How about yourself, Megan?
Pretty good. You know, work's good, business is good, family's good. This season of the podcast has been pretty good so far, I think. We've had some really amazing guests on the show so far. And really today's episode's no different. No matter how long people have been in the financial services industry, they know they need to protect themselves. You know, someone might be the most straight-laced advisor on the face of the planet with the happiest clients there ever were, but it's still a good idea to have E&O insurance, right? And maybe even a cybersecurity policy. I mean, with these guys, you know, you're advising your clients to cover their downside risks for their investments, right? But shouldn't you be doing the same for your business? And maybe you've had coverage but aren't sure how the claims are covered, or maybe you've been thinking about getting a cyber policy but are still on the fence. And joining us today to discuss the topics like that is Jessica Thayer. Jessica's the Senior Vice President and Practice Leader of Starkweather Financial Institutions Risk Solutions, which is an industry-specific practice group focused solely on assisting and guiding investment advisors, broker-dealers, private funds, and similar funds like that in the financial services industry towards successful and efficient risk transfer solutions. She and her team are actually specialists in directors and officers liability, E&O, which is errors and omissions, fidelity, cybersecurity, employment practices liability, and fiduciary liability. Thanks for joining us today, Jessica.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So, Jessica, to just dive into the conversation that we're talking about, what exactly is errors and omissions?
So errors and omissions coverage, I do want to just caveat the fact that every insurance company has a different policy form. So the actual definition will change and be different among the various insurers. But for the most part, what it covers is any professional services that you're rendering to a third party. So as a registered investment advisor, it would cover, financial planning, investment advisory services. It could also be brought in to cover tax prep. And there are a host of different sort of services that you can have listed. But for the most part, what it covers is wrongful acts in the failure or in the rendering of providing professional services to a third party. So it is quite broad.
Okay. So that kind of covers everything. What are the common claims that you see coming from the industry?
Yeah, so the typical claim comes under breach of fiduciary duty under ERISA. So that's any sort of alleged wrongful act associated with your breach of fiduciary duty. That's your most typical E&O claim. We also see a lot of regulatory issues coming to fruition. If you have an enforcement action against you for wrongdoing in your services to a client or customer, that is a typical errors and omissions claim. And then another one where you may have to have added coverage added to your E&O is trading errors. So if you meant to trade a certain amount and you made a mistake in doing so, and there was damages, there's a delta between what you did trade for and what you meant to trade for, and you have to make your client whole, that's what we call cost of corrections. And that can be a frequent claim under the E&O as well. But the long and the short of it is each claim is very different, the way the lawsuit comes in and what it alleges. But for the most part, if it's in the negligence of providing professional services, it's typically an E&O claim.
Okay.
Interesting. How are regulatory investigations or any sort of reg actions covered?
Yeah, so in a typical E&O policy, and that is sort of the nuances, is you have just so everyone understands, you have a template or a boilerplate policy. And in that you have, various terms and conditions. And then it would be up to you as the insured, and more importantly, your agent or broker, to amend those terms to make sure it's as broad as possible. So one of the aspects that we hone in on is the definition of claim. And the reason for that is because the definition of claim is how the policy is triggered. So the policy really starts paying out once that definition of claim is met. So in the typical definition, a formal investigation, an enforcement action, inclusive of a Wells notice, a subpoena against an insured person, a criminal proceeding, an administrative or regulatory proceeding, those are all a formal regulatory investigation is really when it starts, a typical E&O policy starts paying out. Now, you can amend your policy to provide coverage for informal regulatory investigations, and that would mean that the policy is triggered earlier on in the process. If you do add that coverage, it would not cover, your typical sweeps or your typical regulatory examinations. It would have to be really honed in on in a very specific informal investigation. So you can enhance your policy to have that. That is an enhancement. And then there's also an enhancement called pre-claim defense cost coverage. So if you did incur defense costs or attorney's fees before, let's just say it was an informal investigation and you didn't have the informal investigations coverage, but you did have this pre-claim coverage, you could obtain coverage for attorney's fees if it did become a formal regulatory proceeding. It would sort of provide almost like a look back and cover the investigative expenses before it actually became a claim. That's called pre-claim coverage. So there are a lot of nuances to this, but for the most part, in a typical boilerplate policy, it provides coverage for formal regulatory proceedings is when it's triggered.
Okay. Yeah. So nothing like run of the mill, like you said, for, a regular audit or suite, but something that's very specific to your business, perhaps.
Exactly. When they sort of find something is really when they start bringing an enforcement action or serve you a subpoena. That means they have found something, they've found some wrongdoing, and that's when this policy really comes into play.
Okay. And what impacts the pricing of someone's policy?
Yeah, so there are a lot of factors that will impact pricing, and each insurance company rates these factors differently. But for the most part, the driving factors are the size of your firm, so your assets under management, the type of investments that you're working with, if you're working with alternatives or private funds, and it's not just your typical stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. If you're in alternatives, that will drive your pricing up. Your claims history, if you have had claims in the past, typically we do see that as impacting your pricing. And then also your policies and procedures. If you have really good policies and procedures in place and you have all of that documented and you're really documenting a lot of your conversations with your clients and you have good oversight over all of that, that positively impacts your pricing. So there are a lot of nuances. And if you look at the E&O application that you would complete, you can see what the insurance companies are getting at in terms of the questions that they're asking. And there are typically the insurance applications are 3 to 4 pages long, and they do ask a lot of, obviously, about your risk profile in terms of how your company's designed, but also about the policies and procedures. So the more information you can provide and light you can shed on those aspects, obviously that will help tell your story and get you better pricing.
So having a good supervisory system in place is kind of key as far as your rates go with the insurance company, I take it. One subject that always seems to be a hot topic, and I've been to several conventions and what have you, and it's been key with the SEC for years now, is the cybersecurity policy. And I was just wondering, if you have a cybersecurity insurance policy, what's covered by that?
Now for a short break.
Established in 1879, Starkweather & Shepley is presently the 61st largest insurance brokerage firm in the U.S. The firm has been held in trust since 1935, which ensures the firm will remain privately held in perpetuity, providing certainty to clients and associates alike. The firm provides commercial and personal insurance, health and employee benefits, surety bonding, and risk management services. To learn more, please contact Jessica Thayer at jthayer@starshep.com or 401-435-3600, extension 2645.
And now, back to the podcast.
Insurance policy, what's covered by that?
Yeah, so cyber is an ever-evolving risk exposure, and the hackers keep getting more savvy and finding different ways into the system. So it is a very important coverage, and we're seeing more and more of our clients consider it and end up purchasing it because it is a risk exposure that you can't completely mitigate. And the insurance that we have available it's very, very broad, and it provides a lot of ancillary services that our clients find extremely helpful. So there are a lot of aspects that are covered by a cybersecurity policy. So you have your typical, we get sued for our failure to protect confidential information, and there's been damages by your client's clients, and therefore they would sue you for those damages, and you have that coverage. So that is sort of the liability side of things. But you also have other coverage aspects, such as if you think you've had a breach, our program provides access to a data breach coach. You would contact them. They would walk you through whether or not it makes sense to get data forensics out to figure out if there was a downfall in your systems and if there was information that was compromised, and therefore, according to state laws, you have to notify those parties. All of those services, so the data breach coach, the data forensics, the attorneys to help you with notifications if there was an issue, credit monitoring, those are all covered by a cyber policy. So it's very important to understand that it's not just the damages in the lawsuits associated with a cyber breach, but also these other services. The coverage also is quite broad in that provides regulatory defense and penalties. So if a regulatory body, like this is obviously an issue that the SEC is focusing on, if there was a downfall and the SEC were to bring fines and penalties against you, that's actually covered by the cyber policies. It also covers cyber crime, cyber extortion, business interruption, if your systems were to go down, or if your systems caused your client systems to go down, that's all covered under a cyber policy. So really a good coverage to have.
Yeah, I had no idea that it was so holistic with everything that it covered. That's really amazing.
Yeah, that's a good word for it, holistic.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because I just figured it would cover maybe the breach and, any sort of claims that came after the fact, but I didn't think about all of the things on the front end that you need to help take care of your clients and your business.
Yeah, and I think historically that was the case, Megan, is that it was really just a liability-based policy and it was more reactive, so to speak. But now what they've found is that in order to mitigate that actual lawsuit is to try to get out front and provide the credit monitoring to the potentially impacted parties and close the holes so subsequent hacks don't occur. So to be more proactive in the approach, and they've sort of bundled that all within one policy form. And as I've mentioned before, which is the case with the E&O, is each insurer's policy is different, but the one we work most closely with has all of these services available to the insured.
Okay. What are some of the latest cyberclaim trends that you've seen out there?
So the most common ones that we've seen is cyber extortion, where a hacker gets in and shuts down our clients' systems and requires almost a ransom, so to speak. The most recent one that we had was a demand of Bitcoin. So our client systems were shut down, and we got them in touch with the insurance company, and the insurance company actually held Bitcoin, got that to the hacker, and the hacker got the systems back up and running, all within the same business day. So that one was interesting, and we do see that often, but we also see just phishing scams. I think we're all familiar with in our personal and our professional life, where you get emails and you're not quite sure, did a client send this, or is this really my Amex bill? And you don't know whether to click on it and not, because these hackers are so savvy in terms of trying to they understand the psychology of people and what they want to click on or what they're used to clicking on. And everyone's so busy in their lives that sometimes you just inadvertently click on something, and that gives them full access to your system, and they can put viruses in your system and take control of your company's systems and get the information they need. So it's really educating your employees is so important to try to figure out is this a real email or not, and provide the resources where if it isn't, they're able to get the right people involved or put it in a place where it's safe and people can dissect whether it is an issue or not. So phishing is really the biggest driver right now for loss in this area. And that's because, like I said, we're so busy and we are clicking on things. And if people haven't been properly educated on what can be a legit email and what may not be a legit email, that can really wreak havoc on your computer systems. So those are really, I would say, the most prevalent. And then obviously we see different ones where people will just come back to their computer and somebody's already taking control and going into different files and they're not quite sure how, and they have to get data forensics in there to figure it out. But I would say the phishing and the extortion in general are the most common ones.
Yeah, that's a little bit on the scary side. A lot of people have raised a lot of questions about that. And I've seen examples of phishing attacks and that sort of thing. But a lot of advisors out there, they're working from their home. They're single person shops trying to help out their friends with their investments. Why would those type of investment advisors, why would they need cyber coverage? I understand a big investment advisor with several advisor reps and needing that. But if you're sitting there working from your house, why would you need cyber coverage?
Well, if you hold confidential information, so any, birth date, social security numbers, bank account information, anything along those lines, you're legally liable to protect that information. So whether you're a one-person shop or a large corporation, you are legally liable, and each state has different laws to protect that information. So you have to be comfortable that you're properly safeguarding that information. And to be honest with you, I think, in my opinion, it's completely impossible to mitigate. Even as a one-person shop with the best virus protection and, the best software out there to try to mitigate this, hackers are still getting around that and still able to take that information. And then you could be sued, even as one person, for your failure to protect that information. And you're required by state law to notify those parties and make sure that they understand that their information could have been breached. So having, access to these services would help you be able to do that, essentially. But you are legally liable when you hold confidential information to protect it, regardless of who you are.
Yeah, the fiduciary duty kind of goes into making sure you safeguard everything that you come across. But that's a lot of really good information that you shared with us today. But the most important question I have is that seeing that we're kind of dorks here, what would be your superpower if you had one, and why?
So my son's a big superhero fan. So my inner child would say I'd love to fly. But then my more practical side of me would say I would love to have the ability to time travel forward and backwards. So that would be the superpower I think I would like. It would just, one, it would be interesting. And two, I think I could really capitalize on it. Especially when you're talking about insurance and you're always talking about what could happen. And you can figure out if it really does.
Very
right?
true. Very true.
Don't do that.
Exactly. I warned you. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, that's pretty amazing. Colin, I still don't know what your superpower would be. I know I've already discussed mine is I would want to teleport, and anyone in my personal bubble gets to teleport with me. So this way we don't never have to fly as a family again. It's just you're automatically there with all of your bags. But I'm not sure what Colin's is. Colin, what's yours?
I'm kind of shooting for the time travel thing too. That'd be great. I'll have to go get the latest lottery numbers, but yeah, time travel.
That's amazing. Well, thank you, Jessica, for joining us today. It's been a really insightful conversation. I know I've learned a ton about the two different types of policies. I didn't know so much was covered by both of those. And so I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot as well. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, we'll have Jessica's bio and links to Starkweather's website in our show notes so you can learn more about their services. We want to thank you all for joining us today and hope you all join us next time on the RIA Compliance Collective. Until next time, we're here to get you there.
Thank you for listening to the RIA Compliance Collective. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you want to experience the RIA Compliance Concepts difference yourself, visit riacc.io. From mock audits to customized compliance procedures, ongoing compliance assistance, and beyond, we're here for you always. Keep listening to discover more on how you can keep your advisory firm compliant so you can focus on achieving your goals. RIA Compliance Concepts. We're here to get you there.